Welcome to another episode of the Disciple Standard Podcast. We're glad you've joined us. In our topic today, we're going to be talking about systems and leadership. It's going to be a great topic. We've got another update on how things are going, and then a fantastic interview with Sarah Hasis, who is one of our best disciple makers. And we're going to talk about how she lives this out in her life as a nurse in her everyday life. Anyway, great show. Glad you're here. Let's go. Okay, for the topic today, I want to continue to talk about systems, and particularly systems and leadership, and how to think about that just a little bit. Jake, it's been 2 weeks. We took a week off last week, so missed you. But 2 weeks ago, we talked about Proverbs 9, and we talked about the development of systems that sustain ministry. I want to continue on that topic and talk a little bit about what we mean by the disciple standard. When we talk about the disciple standard, we're talking about a new, also at the same time, ancient operating system for the church. And we often compare that with the legacy system, which is how the modern church is and has been operating. And one of the key theses that we have is this, that the legacy system often teaches people in random rather than systematic ways. Whereas the disciple standard is meant to teach Christianity in a systematic way. So instead of getting little pieces here or there and trying to piece everything together, there's an intentional relationship that you have with someone where now you try to paint the whole picture and help people to see Christianity in its totality and really understand the gospel in a systematic way so that that person, once grasping it, can pass it along to someone else. And anyway, there's a kind of unique way that I want to go about this. I don't remember how many years ago, some number of years ago, someone asked me to read a book authored by Robert Kiyosaki, and it was really about money and how to make money. And in this book, Robert Kiyosaki, he had what he called the cash flow quadrant. And I thought it was interesting, but I didn't see really how it related to me in ministry for a long time. And then later on, I started thinking about especially this idea of creating systems. And I thought, oh man, there's something there. And so there's an analogy here that I'd like to walk through to just help people think about ministry. And let me first of all just explain this cash flow quadrant to people. How do you make money? Well, Robert Kiyosaki says, well, for the most part, when people start thinking about making money, they think about becoming an employee. So, I'm going to go get a job somewhere. And what ends up happening is that there's a job requirement and you have to show up and you have to give your effort and you have to give your time. And what you do is you basically trade your time for a paycheck. So you get paid for the amount of time that you put in, depending on the kind of job you have that, discerns your pay. But that's how you make money. You trade your time for money. You have a job. Well, some people, as they, let's just say that you're going to be a plumber. And so you get a job, there's a plumber who hires you and you work as a plumber's assistant. And pretty soon you've become proficient at plumbing. And you say to yourself, man, I don't know why when I go on a job, that person makes all the money. I could make the money. And so you say to yourself, I don't want to just be employed and keep trading my time for dollars. I'd love to get a bigger slice of the pie. And when someone pays me, pays for something to be done, I should get all the pay. And so people get this desire to be self-employed. And what Robert Kiyosaki says is, okay, that to a certain extent, you gain some benefits from that. Now, instead of you have a job and you have a boss, now you say goodbye to your boss, you become your own boss, and you own a job. But he says there's lots of people who desire to do that, but what they don't realize is, not only did they become a full-time plumber, but then, now they have to get into full-time sales and advertising. And now, the work truck and the tools you have to buy and purchase. And it ends up actually you spend more time, maybe for a little more money, but still, there's no leverage involved in this overall system. You're just trading your time and effort for dollars. And often when you're self-employed, it's more effort, sometimes even for less dollars. Anyway, what Robert Kiyosaki, and he talks about, his book is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So he talks about those who are on this left-hand side of the equation are the poor dad. And he says, hey, rich dad, here's what they come to realize. They move to the right-hand side of this equation. And so at the upper right, he has a B, business owner. And here you own a system and people who work for you. So now, what you're going to do is you're going to put together a system. Maybe there's going to be, we'll just stick with plumbing because we have it. You're going to have a whole plumbing business, and you're going to hire 5 people who are going to go out and do the work, and you're going to have another person who does all the scheduling, and you're going to kind of put this system all together. And then you actually, at some point or another, because you own the business, you have a manager who manages the whole thing. You just have to be involved just occasionally, saying, let's go this direction or let's go that direction. But what ends up happening is the people who are working in your business produce the money, and now you're no longer trading your time for dollars. I mean, you might not work that much at all anymore. But because you've set up this system and you own this system and you have people who work for you, now you're getting paid because you did all the thinking and all the work to set up this system. And in the final part of the quadrant, which is in the lower right-hand corner, what he says is, okay, and then what people do is they make investments. And the prior money they made, they have their money go to work, and their money goes out and earns more money. And so now, there's all kinds of leverage that winds up happening where you start to just receive an absolutely passive income. You're not even doing any work at all, but your money is actually making more money. And anyway, in his book, he's urging people to move from the left-hand side of the equation to the right-hand side of the equation. Just realize you don't have to keep just trading your time for dollars. You can actually start to use your thinking and put together this system. And pretty soon, you'll start to receive an income even when you're asleep, so to speak. I wonder if you have any thoughts as you hear all that, Jake.
Yeah, I hang around, you guys all the time. People like you, people like Aaron. Like, I think you guys are all like that same kind of mindset. And it's almost like I get to leech that information off of you. And I don't know, I've been finding myself, trying to go down that route as well and seeing, the transition between each side.
Yeah, good. Well, I think it's helpful to sort of think through. Anyway, when I first read this book, I don't know how many years ago, I thought it was interesting, but I work in ministry, and so what does this have to do for me? And so I kind of set it aside, but I've later picked it up, especially when thinking about creating systems, and I've kind of thought through this. And so especially for those of you who are in full-time ministry, I want to think this through with you and think about creating systems. So here, if I was to just make an analogy here, I would say, when you first come into ministry, maybe as a pastor, you get assigned tasks, you have a job. And so maybe there's a church counselor, there's a church, and they've given you a job description, and here's what you need to do. And, these are the expectations. And anyway, you can almost think about this like maintenance ministry. There's a ministry, it already exists. You didn't create it. You've come in, you've taken a job. You're a pastor of this church. The church is already there. And you put forward the effort, and the results are designed by those who assigned you the task. So do this or that. And to a certain extent, that's the way it goes. And there's lots of people who have a ministry, and you might just call it maintenance ministry. It already existed. I'm just maintaining this system or structure. But I think, this probably is the arc of most people's ministry. They say to themselves, boy, I want to grow. I want this to become more. And so instead of just only doing the things that were assigned to you, you begin to say to yourself, boy, we could do this or we could do that. And I just call this like developing ministry, and you begin to self-initiate like, okay, I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to be doing, I've been asked to do. But then in addition to that, I'm going to put forward some more effort and some more growth. And anyway, that I would say is akin to the self-employed. But now on the right-hand side of the equation, this is maybe more what I want to get talking about. I call this ministry, people systems, and leadership ministry, where you start to develop systems where there's initial bursts of effort plus some regular maintenance perhaps, but it leads to large and long-lasting results. And then finally in the lower right-hand quadrant, I just call it ministry assets. You've got this initial burst of effort that leads to very wide-scale results. And I call this legacy ministry. I'll see if I can just illustrate that now with our discipleship system. So, one possibility if you lead a church is that you just say, okay, I've got to do everything. And I think maybe even when I first started in ministry, that was my idea. It's like, okay, everything that has to happen here, I've got to do it. But this verse in Ephesians chapter 4, I think it's just very important in verses 11 and 12. It talks about why Christ calls some to be apostles or prophets or evangelists or pastors or teachers. And it says this, to equip God's people for works of service or works of ministry, so that the whole body of Christ may be built up. And it's interesting because you could get the impression in any church that the pastor is the one who's supposed to be doing all the work and everyone else is a recipient of the ministry. But this verse is so clear. God's people are the ones who are doing the ministry. The role of an apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher is to help equip them so they can do the ministry. And so one of the ways I think about it, I just have this illustration. I keep making these illustrations in different ways, is you could say, okay, well, I found myself to be a pastor or a church leader in one form or another, and I've got all these people who are part of the church, and so let me do everything that needs to be done to make sure that everyone here grows spiritually. And I would just say, past some very small number of people, you just cannot really help the gospel go deep in, all these people's lives. So what needs to happen is you need to think more systematically. What if I just chose 2 people? This is our system. And I really taught them, and I created this system so that they could replicate this. I taught them so that at the conclusion of a year, we could all go find 2 more people. And you'd have to create a kind of system, which 222 Disciple is. I mean, everything is there that you need in order that people can go and duplicate themselves. And so you do that again, and then again, and then again, and then again, and finally again. And what winds up happening is now you've only worked with just a few people and you've gone really deep with them, but you've created a system such that now if you stepped back, like a business owner who at some point they get it set up, they could step back. This keeps going because now you have a system in your congregation or in your church where people are continuing to disciple each other, and they're alive and they feel, compelled, and they have a vision for doing this, so that even if you somehow step back, this process and the result is so much more profound in a congregation. And so anyway, when it comes to leadership in a church, I think getting a system set up such that once you put in the effort, it begins to grow on itself and build itself, and you have a church where people know the gospel well and can pass it to others who can pass it to others. As a pastor, all of a sudden, your life got so much easier because you don't have to do it all. Anyway, Jake, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that transition almost in myself too. I started as the children's assistant, just doing tasks. Yep. And, here and there, just getting stuff to do. At the time, Holly, who was organizing everything, just gave it to me. And then I, watching it through my life, looking back on it now, you go above and beyond because you take ownership of it.
Right.
And then it goes, and I love how you equated it to that because it makes so much sense, where that now you're a leader and you're leading other people. And I think even now, I'm thinking of our intern, Ethan, who is another me.
Yeah, you've given him some tasks, but you're also training him up so that he provides leadership, and you've been discipling Ethan, which I think is so great. There's something about this, and I'm pushing people to become more systematic. I think the old legacy system, it just worked in random ways. There was no rhyme or reason to it. Here, this is a system that has thought put into it, that as you put in your initial effort, eventually it builds up such that, things begin to take care of themselves almost, because now you have the whole body of Christ built up, as Ephesians 4 says, and God's people have been properly equipped so that they're able to carry out the work of ministry. Instead of just one person trying to do all the effort for however many people are in your congregation, now you've built up the whole congregation and there's a system at work. And I guess that's what we're trying to get at. Anyway, great topic for the day. Glad that you've joined us. We're going to move to the second part of our show now, which is called The Tipping Point. Let's go. This week, we're announcing 21 new disciples into our disciple multiplication system. Now, we missed a week, so it's actually 2 weeks worth, but 21. It's just God continues to bless. He continues to bring people in, and we're grateful for that. Let's take some time to welcome some people. Lots of names. Lillian Crespo, Gracie Joe, Cesar Castillo, Monica Ortiz, Jason Mitchell, Michael Gardner, Caitlin White, Stephanie Brooks, John Catterberg, Amanda Martinez, Jonathan Olson, Daniel Budd, Eric and Lori Stewart, Megan Vera, Jemima Murray, Cameron Scarborough, Kathy Fortin, Lachlan Beebe, Nick Staley, and Awilda Lopez. To each one, we want to welcome you. We are so glad that you have begun this journey of discipleship, that you're seeking to get to know Jesus, but even more, learning how to make Jesus known through a discipleship relationship. And as you get started, we just want to welcome you. We're glad you're here. To Missy Huntley, Josh Zettler, Diego Granada, Travers Jacobs, Heather Gunnell, John Granada, Brent Flickema, Andrew DeGelder, Tony Lauder, Jadina Toribio, Lori Woodward, Angel Jacobs, John Gomez, John Staninger, and Eric and Lori Stewart. We're just so grateful that you are pouring into people's lives, that you've taken on these new disciples, and we just wish you God's blessings. Especially for our first-time disciple makers, I want to give a shout-out to you, Travers Jacobs, Jadina Toribio, Eric and Lori Stewart, and Brent Flickema. Just so thankful that you've made this move from receiving to giving, and you're giving of yourselves, and you're leading people in disciple making. We're just grateful for you. So great job. We want to recognize Missy Huntley and my wife, Andrea Vanderplug. Their disciple network has grown to 10 total, and recognize Chris Cassis also. His disciple network has grown to 30. And, over the course of time, as people just begin, we're beginning to see how people are, their network is growing. The disciples they've discipled are discipling people. And before you know it, you turn around and like Chris has, there's 30 people that he's impacted. Anyway, we just want to recognize what God's done in your lives and thank you. This brings the total number of disciples in our system to 697. So we're just on the cusp now of 700 people. This is just multiplying and growing all the time. And so if you're tuning in week by week, you've been able to see that. If you've been thinking about it, I just encourage you, join our system. We'd love for you to become a part of it. Go to our website, 222 Disciple, and join at the top. We'd be glad to have you in our system as well and see how God can use you. At any rate, we're now going to turn to our third segment called Ordinary People. We have a fantastic interview with Sarah Hasis. Let's go. Want to welcome to the show today, Sarah Hasis. Sarah, welcome. This segment we call Ordinary People, not because, I'm pointing out any particular person, but just to say that, if you look at the disciples Jesus chose, one of their features was this, that he just chose ordinary people. And that's how he built his kingdom. And, not that you're just an ordinary person. Of course, you're extraordinary in your own way. But on the other hand, you and I were just talking, and I think this is kind of important. There may be any number of people who have the impression, in order to be a disciple maker or in order to really serve Jesus, I've got to have gone to seminary, have specialized training or whatever. And, that's just not true. God uses ordinary people all the time. And, one of the things that we were talking about just before the interview is that earlier on in your life, you and your husband, you both believed in God and you had Christian faith, but you weren't quite certain about how to articulate that. And over the time, especially as you've been discipled, you've grown in your ability to articulate your faith. And you work as a nurse, and one of the things I'm always astounded by is how many opportunities you have as a nurse to share your faith. And I wonder if we just start with that. Talk a little bit about kind of the history with that and, the opportunity you have in your everyday life.
Yes. Well, I've been a nurse for 17 years, and really in the beginning of that time was that time where I really couldn't articulate my faith. And science is intriguing and it's fascinating, and we can just get lost in some of those facts, and we forget the spiritual component, that God is the one that created and designed us. So over the years since I finished discipleship, I've really just become more bold and just been able to talk to people at the bedside. And there were several years that before I finished discipleship, I remember certain people that I would take care of that almost nursed me, that would ask me a spiritual question or ask if I had been able to share hope with other patients. And that really just like caught my ear. And when I went through discipleship and fully understood just the hope that we have in Jesus, how he is that missing link. He is the connection for every hope that we have, for every reason that we have life here on earth. This world isn't our home. Being at the bedside with a person who is face to face with that reality that this world is not a permanent place and our lives are fragile here on earth, I have the words to share with them the hope that I have in Jesus. And I just pray for those listening ears, which, vulnerability is a big thing. It puts you in a tight spot. And you have helped me over the years too, not to press too hard for people, because we all have a story to tell. And a lot of it is listening to their story and maybe just saying one word of encouragement to take them from just a slight disbelief to less disbelief on their way to understanding who Jesus is. And as time goes on, I have more patience for my patients because I understand that belief was something that had to come with time for me. That time through discipleship and studying the Word of God. And I had just mentioned to you also, like Jeremy and I together would talk about things and talk about our unbelief at home. And we would kind of encourage each other or just question each other. Like, what do you think about this? And through studying God's Word together, trying to find out the facts, or coming and asking you, our pastor, or other people here at church. I think I had mentioned to you even one time about Thomas, relating to Thomas. Like, unless I could put my finger right in that hole, how can I really believe that he's the Son of God, that he was born of a virgin, he died on the cross, he died, he rose again. We as Christians say some really amazing things, like Pastor Aaron has said. So having patience with my patients, just in leading them gently along the path to Jesus, is the biggest hope that I can pray for them. And then some of the patients that I meet are Christians for years and years and years. And it's, again, just an encouraging and uplifting thing for me. And I get to pray with them several occasions, and it's just a wonderful thing, I think, to minister to my fellow nurses and doctors around me when they see me being willing to do that. That's
awesome.
With other patients.
What a testimony of how God used an ordinary person in their everyday life, and what a powerful, powerful ministry you can have with your patients. So that's great. I'd like to ask you another question, and this is just thinking about who you are and even some of what we've discussed before. But one of the things that I think about discipleship is there is a system to it, and maybe to a certain extent, a prescribed way in which we go about things. But I always tell people at rock bottom, discipleship is not like a formula. It's like relationships. And there's real genuine friendships that form. And we were talking a little bit about some of the people that you've been involved in discipling, and every relationship goes differently. And yet God uses each one of those in very unique ways. I wonder if you'd be willing to reflect on that just a little bit with us.
What first comes to mind is a specific patient that I took care of that had a relationship with Jesus, but she was just hurting. And before that personal connection that I found with Jesus, I didn't give my phone number out to patients on a routine basis. That was definitely, oh, let's leave work at work. I'm perfectly fine being an ordinary person. So, but I found that as Jesus worked in my life, when I would make those connections with people at work, I didn't want to just leave them there for that 12 hours, especially when I knew that they were seeking Jesus and that they had an earnest, sincere desire just to grow and to heal. So I've shared my phone number with a few people, and it's amazing the connections that God has just put me in at work that have continued on. And one sweet little lady, she is from Fort Pierce, and her granddaughter was going through nursing school and was very nervous about taking her state boards. And I was able to pray with her granddaughter over the phone before she took her test and help calm her nerves and just give a word of encouragement. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing that this grandmother recognized that the power of Jesus can change things. And her granddaughter wanted to take a test. And so let's call in the peace of Jesus that passes all understanding, that's going to settle our mind and heal our body. He does it all. So, I mean, there's no limit.
Yeah, that's
Jesus.
great.
Isn't
That's
that
really great.
amazing?
And maybe, another thing, if I could just get you to reflect on it, now you've yourself taken on and discipled several people. Each time, the people you've taken on, they're ordinary people with their own individual struggles or their own individual situations. And God's called you to not only mentor and disciple them, but to be a friend. I wonder if you just reflect a little bit on those relationships and how they've played out.
Yes. I think that's one area he's still working in my heart, of being a genuine friend. Because like as I have work and as I have home life and school life, balancing that and being everywhere, giving my phone number out, not hesitating to give my phone number out and be there when the Holy Spirit convicts me, is how do I follow up and be sincere and be a genuine friend? What does that look like? Is that someone that Jesus would want me to attend all their children's birthday parties and, showing up for everything? And so I'm just thankful that it's still an area of growth that we find in the day-to-day with each other. The ladies that I have been discipling also, we invite each other into our lives, and we go over to each other's houses, or this whole pandemic has like thrown us all for a loop of how do we find our normal again. But I mean, it's a beautiful thing to talk about Disney World and to talk about our kids' birthdays and talk about Jesus all together. Like I really think Jesus wants that. He wants to be a part of our everyday.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm so grateful for your heart and grateful for your passion for the Lord. And I just want to continue to wish you God's blessings as you work in his kingdom for his purposes. And I'm just really proud of you for, the ministry that you have. Anyway, thank you for coming on the show today. And to everyone who's tuned in, thank you for watching. We're glad you're here, and we'll see you next week. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to the Disciple Standard podcast. We're so glad you joined us. We encourage you to continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Also, if you want to learn more about the Multiply method or learn about how to take the Multiply pledge, we encourage you to join us on our website at multiply222.com. Have a great day.